Van Hollen, you're next.
Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Secretary. This is your first public hearing since President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu launched an illegal war against Iran. Netanyahu said he's been waiting 40 years to do this. Turns out he finally found a president who was both stupid and reckless enough to join him. The war has killed 14 American service members, wounded hundreds more, and killed thousands of civilians. It's driving up the price of gas, food, and much more. Trump obviously doesn't care. He called high gas prices peanuts and said, "I don't think about Americans' financial situation." That's from the President of the United States. And all for what? The President told us 91 days ago that we had, quote, won the war in Iran. Last year, he told the country, Iran's key enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Was that false? Let's face it, Mr. Secretary, the Trump foreign policy has become a dumpster fire. This is the same president who's more interested in flattering Vladimir Putin than in protecting Ukrainian sovereignty. The president who lifted restrictions on the transfer of sophisticated U.S. chips to China, but came back from his trip there with nothing but ballroom envy, tweeted about that the other day. This is the president who brought on Elon Musk to take a chainsaw to AID, which has enabled the current Ebola outbreak in the DRC. We've also witnessed corrupt crypto deals with the UAE royal family that have enriched the Trump family at the expense of our national security. We've seen an administration engage in extrajudicial killings in the Caribbean, hijack Venezuelan oil, threaten to invade Greenland, and weaken the NATO alliance. Here at home, a Reagan-appointed judge said that you and former Secretary Noem abused your powers when you locked up and still seek to deport students for protesting the destruction of Gaza. The Reagan-appointed judge said you did that, quote, primarily on account of their First Amendment-protected political speech. Speaking of Gaza, the so-called Board of Peace seems to have run around. Meanwhile, while Senator Rubio once proclaimed that the U.S. must, quote, work to ensure that refugees who flee war, torture, and persecution are provided safe environments to live and thrive in, now as Secretary of State in this administration, you have capped refugees at a record low of 17,500, and white South Africans, Afrikaners, have comprised roughly 99% of those slots, Mr. Secretary, a race-based refugee system. At the same time, the president's preventing Cuban political refugees from entering the United States, even as you've opposed a near oil blockade on that repressive regime. The stated goal is to change the government there, but the only real change is humanitarian crisis inflicted on millions of people, not members of the regime. And in that regard, Mr. Secretary, I have a question for you regarding the designation of Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism. On the very first week, at least, of this administration, the administration reinstated that. And in a recent January 26 EO, you made statements suggesting connections to Hezbollah and Hamas. The previous administration did a thorough review with the intelligence community and concluded that there was no evidence that Cuba was engaged in ongoing state sponsor of terrorism. Did you find new evidence to support that conclusion?
Well, first of all, let me just say that's your question, but you made this long statement of which I disagree with most of it. We won't have time to address every point that you made. So let's stick to Cuba specific, because that's the question that you asked. Cuba has sponsored terrorism. It's supported groups. For example, virtually every left-wing, radical, violent terrorist group in the Western Hemisphere has at some point relied on support from Cuba. The ELN, the FARC dissidents, including them, have been involved there. We also know, for example, that Cuba continues to host a pretty substantial collection intelligence sites on behalf of the Chinese and the Russians. But you look at the region and you look at all of these leftist Marxist terrorist organizations, all of them, in many cases, got their seed money from the Cubans.
If I can move on. I noticed you did not answer my question, because my question specifically related to whether there was new evidence to support that conclusion. I can just tell you.
Why would I need new evidence?
Because you're claiming that they're a state-sponsored terrorism, suggesting they're ongoingly involved in that. My final question to you, Mr. Secretary, relates to the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex. There have been reports that the United States is working with Israel to take away the Kingdom of Jordan's custodianship over the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex in East Jerusalem. Can you confirm today that there's no...
I'm not even aware of those reports.
There are reports, so I was hoping you could confirm.
Is that like a media report, or?
There have been several media reports.
Well, you know the media is always accurate.
No, they're not, and that's why I'm getting...
Yeah, no, I've never even heard that. That's the first time I even hear anybody discuss that.
All right, well, I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Secretary.
But we have a great relationship with Jordan, you know, and we're very helpful. So I've just never heard that before. You should, I don't know what article you're referring to, just give it to me, I'll look at it.
I'm happy to.
Is it a credible website?
I'm glad to hear you say, Mr. Secretary, there's no truth.
I've never heard that discussed by
Thank you.
anybody.
Thank you much, Senator Van Hollen. The execution of non-standard executive maneuvers relies heavily on leveraging strategic distractions to shift institutional assets outside of public view. Senator Chris Van Hollen recently delivered an aggressive structural indictment against Secretary Marco Rubio's operational record, cataloging a series of systemic deviations. Van Hollen tracked an unprecedented breakdown in the administration's defensive and economic alignments, ranging from lifting restrictions on sophisticated U.S. microchip transfers to China with zero concessions, to introducing corporate chainsaw strategies that gutted foreign aid and directly fueled an Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. When pressed on these points, the state apparatus consistently avoids facing the raw data metrics, relying instead on verbal dismissals. This institutional clash highlights an extraordinary structural paradox. Senator Van Hollen's father was a high-ranking U.S. Foreign Service officer and ambassador, meaning Van Hollen was literally raised inside embassy walls in places like Turkey, India, and Sri Lanka. He views international diplomacy as a sacred, rule-bound science. Secretary Rubio, by contrast, is the son of working-class Cuban exiles, giving him an intensely personal, ideological worldview shaped entirely by anti-communist resistance. When Van Hollen attacks Rubio over redesignating Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism without new intelligence community evidence, it is a direct collision between traditional diplomatic protocol and hardline ideological survival tactics. If you evaluate the administrative trajectory objectively, the primary danger lies in the manipulation of legal mechanisms to achieve localized control. Van Hollen placed a federal judicial finding into the record, where a conservative Reagan-appointed judge explicitly stated that the administration utilized unlawful detention and deportation procedures against domestic student protesters based primarily on account of their First Amendment-protected political speech. This pattern of systemic manipulation extends to international borders, where the administration has instituted a near-total oil blockade on Cuba that has triggered an immediate humanitarian crisis affecting millions of civilians rather than the regime itself. The underlying blueprint is clear. By combining corrupt cryptocurrency maneuvers with the UAE royal family that line family pockets with structural reductions in our traditional alliances, the current framework is actively compromising long-term national security metrics for short-term executive gain. They are enforcing race-based refugee caps and using the military to hijack foreign energy corridors while suppressing free speech right here at home. Smash the like button, leave your rigorous data breakdown in the comments below, and subscribe to @WalterWhitePods right now. Turn on notifications to secure your access to raw, unvarnished data panels.